Well, welcome back. Arlene, thank you so much, as usual, for leading us and giving us all a space where we can experience the peace of God and the presence of God. So we love you, and we're so grateful for your leadership in that way. Okay, so before we get into today's message, can we just talk about Easter for a minute? We were kind of talking about it in the lobby a little bit, but just to give those of you that weren't in the lobby just a chance, if you want to make any comments about how it was for you. You guys, it was just so beautiful, having an online experience at the same time as we were gathering in person, and it was just so beautiful. We got to meet people face to face who have been a part of the church since we went online only. So, we've never actually met each other. And so that was so beautiful to get to do that. And it just reminded me just of the beautiful things that the Spirit is doing in our community, and just getting to look out into people's eyes and to hear people talk about last week's experience online, and just seeing how, it's just a really beautiful thing that is happening. And I'm just so grateful to be a part of this community and for all of us to be able to pursue Jesus together and to care for one another. And it's just really great. So I hope that you all had a fantastic Easter. And I will say this too. It was funny, the day after, or a couple of days after, I'm a part of this kind of cohort with some other pastors around the nation. And we were on a Zoom call, and different ones of them, they are a part of fairly large churches that do multiple services, and they were all talking about how tired they were. And I was like, this is the first Easter that I can remember where I wasn't physically exhausted that I wasn't even able to engage with my family. We had church, and then we spent time as a family, and it was just really, really beautiful. So yeah, I just didn't want to cruise right past that. I just wanted to take a second and talk about that, and just tell you guys that I'm so grateful, and that it was so refreshing and just a beautiful picture of resurrection for me. Just our church it's been a year. And so it was just really beautiful to all come together. And I think everyone had a really great time. So yeah, just wanted to share that with all of you. Okay, so for today, today's message title is called Vines and Branches, and today we are going to be taking a look at John 15, where Jesus talks about this idea of Jesus being the vine and us, or his disciples, and by extension us, being the branches. And so I'm going to start off the message just by reading the text, and then we'll dive into it. It's in John 15, and it says this: I am the true vine, and my Father is the Vinedresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away, and every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit. Already you are clean because of the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, it is he that bears much fruit, for apart from me he can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away like a branch and withers, and the branches are gathered, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be full. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. And so first, to kind of start off, let's talk a little bit about vines and branches, okay? Vineyards in the first century, particularly in that area, vineyards were a large part of the local economy. And this is also the case in Old Testament times as well as in the first century. And a healthy vineyard that produced a good crop of grapes would have sustained a farmer. It would have served as a big contribution to the economy. They were really important. And so when you have a vineyard, the health of the fruit, the health of the grapes that was produced depended solely on the health of the branches that they were growing from. And the health of the branches was dependent upon the branches being connected to the vine and receiving their nutrients and their ability to grow and flourish from it. And tending to the vines and the branches was very careful and meticulous work, and it had to be done with great care by the farmer or the vine dresser, or now we'd probably refer to it as a vinter. If the branches were healthy, then good fruit would be produced, and the vineyard would produce grapes that made good wine, and it would be of great use and of great financial benefit and of great purpose for the people. And so here in John 15, we see Jesus using this metaphor of the vine, which actually is a metaphor that we can see being used all throughout Scripture. And it's important to note that when Jesus is using this language of the vines and branches, his disciples would have already been very familiar with this. This was a metaphor that was actually used in the Old Testament to describe the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel was described as being this vine that God had planted. In Psalm 80, Israel is referred to the vine that was brought out of Egypt and planted into the promised land. And you see, as the story goes, as we read throughout the Old Testament, it's this story of God establishing the nation of Israel that was, to be this chosen nation who would show the world who God is and what God is like. And as humans do, we also see throughout the Old Testament that Israel, the nation of Israel, continued to get it wrong. And, we find throughout the Old Testament, there's different passages, but in Isaiah 5:7, it says this: the nation of Israel is the vineyard of the Lord of heaven's armies. The people of Judah are his pleasant garden. He expected a crop of justice, but instead he found oppression. He expected to find righteousness, but instead he heard cries of violence. So when we read the Old Testament, we find many stories that illustrate the people of God messing things up and failing to actually grasp what God is like. And so because of this, because the nation of Israel had been referred to as the vine, and this vine and branches language was very familiar to the disciples, they would have known this when Jesus launched into this teaching. They would have known that Israel was referred to as this vine that God had planted with the purpose of producing good and lasting fruit. So I just wanted to give a little bit of that backstory because that helps us understand to a greater degree the significance of what Jesus is actually saying in these verses. So these are the things that would have been on the disciples' minds as they were listening to Jesus. So knowing this, what I want to do today is break the scripture down and just kind of piece by piece dig a little bit deeper into it to see, okay, so then what does this mean for us today? I know Jesus was talking to his disciples, but what does this mean for us today? And so what we're going to do is something a little bit different. We're going to kind of take piece by piece, and at the end of each section, I'm going to throw up a question on the screen for you to be able to contemplate and to process. And we're not going to answer the questions right away. We're going to come back at the end and then go through and answer the questions. But that way you can write it down. You can take a few minutes right there to process kind of some of your thoughts. And then at the end, when we come back to the questions, I would love for those of you that feel comfortable to share your responses in the chat so we can have a discussion of sorts. I know that it's just me here, but I want today to feel a little bit like a Bible study where we're just going to kind of break this down and we can each have an opportunity to share our thoughts and what we're learning. So the first section that we're going to talk about is we're going to start with verses 1 and 2. And I'm going to go ahead and read it again for you. So John 15, 1 and 2 says, I am the true vine and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes that it may bear more fruit. Now this phrase, the very first thing he says, I am the true vine, is loaded with meaning, okay? This kind of reminds me of times throughout the Gospels when we would see Jesus say things like, you have heard it said, but I say, those kinds of statements. It's like Jesus is saying, you have always known the nation of Israel to be referred to as the vine, but I'm telling you the true vine is actually me. So you have thought that God was like this, but in me, you will see what God is actually like. See, Jesus is the fulfillment of all that Israel was meant to be. And now on to the vine dresser. So Jesus says, I am the true vine and my Father is the vine dresser. So a vine dresser or a vintner has the role of tending to and caring for the vines. And part of this is the pruning process. So pruning is a necessary step in order to have a healthy and thriving vine. Sorry, I just totally lost my place in my notes, but I'm going to find it and it's going to be fine. Okay, so without the pruning process, and if any of you have ever tended to plants or, maybe you grow things, I'm terrible at it, but maybe you've done this before and you know that oftentimes, we have a lemon tree in our backyard, which has now sadly died because of the snowstorm and the freeze. But when it was still alive, there was one time where Dan had to go out and prune and trim away a bunch of the branches. And after he did that, the next time it bloomed, it had just beautiful, gorgeous, huge lemons on it. So without the pruning process, the branches are unable to produce healthy fruit. So the vine dresser's role is to decide where to prune and make cuts and where to leave things intact. The vine dresser makes very strategic cuts in order to produce the healthiest and the most robust vines. And just like the branches on a vine need to be pruned in order to flourish, we need that too in our lives. We need some pruning, and we all can have this tendency to carry things around that are a hindrance to our ability to grow and to flourish. Sometimes these things can be certain mindsets we have that are holding us back. Sometimes it can be behaviors that we're engaging in that aren't healthy for us and that don't push us toward wholeness. Sometimes the things that need to be pruned are things that keep us from working toward shalom and the flourishing of our neighbor. Sometimes we can hold to certain theologies, these beliefs about God that when examined closely can be found to be producing bad fruit, not only in our own lives, but also in the ways that we treat other image bearers. There are all kinds of things that we could put into this category of things that need to be pruned in our life. We could shame and fear and hatred and holding grudges, greed, apathy, certainty, judgment, pride. The list goes on and on and on and on. We all have things in our life that need to be sort of cut away in order for us to be able to be at our best, in order for us to flourish. And so the first question, and Dan's going to put the questions up, and this is like we think this is going to work, so we're trying this out. We're going to put up this first question. I'm going to read it to you really quick, and then we're going to put up the slide, and then we're going to give you about 2 minutes to process and to write that question down, and then we'll come back and we'll move on. So the first question is, what is one thing that you think needs to be pruned in your own life in order for growth to not be stifled? Okay, so hopefully you'll had a chance to write that down, and you can just keep kind of contemplating that as we move on, and then we'll come back at the end and answer it. So let's go ahead now and move on to the next part of the passage that I want to talk about, and it's verses 4 and 5. And it says this: "Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, it is he that bears much fruit, for apart from me you can do nothing." So here in these verses, we see this word abide. Some translations say remain in me and I will remain in you. And the word abide means persevering, continuing, lasting, staying with, being at home with. So abiding in the vine, remaining connected to Jesus, continuing to be close to Jesus, staying with, being at home with Jesus will ensure that the fruit of our life is healthy and whole and good. And see, Jesus made a really big deal about the kind of fruit that our lives produce. Jesus wasn't so much concerned with certain kinds of belief. He was more concerned with the results of those beliefs and how it impacted others. He was concerned about our wholeness and the wholeness of all. And also this way that Jesus speaks of abiding, this him and us and him, it's this beautiful picture of our interdependence and our inextricable connection to one another. See, vines and branches, they're kind of all tangled up with one another, and all of the branches are dependent on the vine, and the vine is their source. The vine provides their sustenance. All the branches run together out of the vine. Sometimes they can get so intertwined that you don't know where one begins and another one ends. And this vine and branches metaphor gives this picture of communal connection, because rarely can one branch be distinguished from another. And just like a vine and its branches, the Christian life is most truly lived in this like jumbled up mess of interconnectedness with God, with one another. This is where our faith really becomes most whole and most true. And because we're all connected, the fruit that we're producing matters even more. It matters even more. Let's move on to verse 10 through 12. It says, if you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be full. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. So when we're talking about abiding in him, all right, now I'm just trying to remember where we were. Okay, I think it was with verses 10 and 12. We were talking about this idea of, in order to abide in Jesus, he tells us in verses 10 through 12 that we need to keep his commandments. And his commandment is love one another as I have loved you. So the way that we continue to abide in Jesus is through entering into this way of radical love that Jesus showed us by the way that he lived his life. That's how we remain in Jesus, is through this radical way of love. And it's through the connection to the true vine that the disciples would show the world what God is like. So he's telling them, if you love each other the way that I have loved you, this is how you abide in me. You abide in me by abiding in love and then taking that love and living that out in the world and with your neighbor. And so the second question for you guys to contemplate is this. Knowing all of this, so knowing that the way that we abide in Jesus, the way that we abide in the true vine is through this radical way of love, what are some ways that you can stay connected to the true vine and abide in him? What are some ways that you can stay connected to the true vine and abide in him? Okay, just FYI, icon.online.church, it clearly has a list of words or phrases that it deems to be inappropriate, and if those are typed, it replaces it with all asterisks. So I'm cracking up in the chat because Britt was trying to say something and apparently it was deemed inappropriate. So if that ever happens to you, that's why. So anyway, so those are the first two questions. And then the last thing that I want to go over when it comes to this passage is I want to go back and talk about verse 6 in this passage. And it says this: if anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away like a branch and withers, and the branches are gathered, thrown into the fire, and burned. So I know that some may read this passage in this way, but when I read this, I don't read it as a passage that threatens some kind of eternal judgment. It sounds super harsh, right? When it's like, the disciples are being compared to branches, and it's saying if the branches don't abide in the vine, they're going to be thrown into a fire and burned. Like, that just feels like, whoa, Jesus, like that escalated quickly, right? But when I read this, I have to read this in the context of who Jesus was and in the ways in which the disciples would have understood what he was saying. And so I read it like I do everything else in Scripture as this invitation into a more just, joy-filled, loving, and connected life. So the branches on grapevines, if you've ever seen a grapevine, we all know that the branches are very thin and brittle, and they're not exactly the kind of wood that you would take, when you take all the grapes off, you're not going to then be able to use the wood of the branches to build a table or really do anything purposeful with them. The only thing that they're useful for, if they aren't bearing fruit, is basically kindling for a fire, or the vine dressers would just throw them out because they had no use. So when we enter, so this is how I look at this passage. This is how I interpret it. This is what feels most true when I look at the character of Jesus and what Jesus is inviting us into. When we enter into Jesus's way of love, when we participate in the kingdom of God, and when we stay connected to love so that love flows out of us to those around us, then we're accepting this invitation to co-create the world with God. We're accepting this invitation to abide in Jesus, to abide in the true vine, to abide in love, and thus take that love, that way of love, out into the world to help usher in true shalom for all. But when we don't do that, when we refuse to connect ourselves to love, and when we choose to avoid the pruning and to basically just live for ourselves and to reject the wholeness and the shalom that the kingdom of God offers us, then we miss out on the good fruit that we as branches could have produced. And in essence, our life is just, it doesn't have that kind of fruit that we are bearing when we choose to not stay connected to the vine. So again, I don't look at it as this verse of terrible judgment that we should live in fear, but it's more like, here's an invitation, and when we don't accept that invitation, then we are unable to enter into this way of love that Jesus has invited us into. So the last question that we're going to talk about so hearing this, understanding this idea of it's this invitation, and at times, I think we all have times where we fail to accept the invitation in one way or another. So the last question is, what are some ways that we can end up rejecting the invitation to abide in Jesus and his way of love? So, again, thank you all so much for your patience as we've been having some difficulties today. But I'm going to go ahead now, and we're gonna discuss. So feel free to throw your answers or your contemplations or your thoughts in the chat, and I'm just going to go through, and we're going to start with question 1, and we're just going to share our thoughts, and we're going to be able to take this time to learn from each other. So, all right, let's see here. Okay, Reese says, this is the first question. What is the one thing that you think needs to be pruned in your own life in order for growth to not be stifled? And Reese says, I want to prune my overwhelming focus on self. I tend to focus too much on what's going on in my head, why I feel the way I do, what is wrong with me. I need to focus more on others and be a better daughter, granddaughter, niece, cousin, friend, etc. That's super good. I love that. My overwhelming focus on self. Because, it's like we all need to focus on ourselves in some way. Like we want to love ourselves and we want to, be whole and healthy human beings. But I love how you said my overwhelming focus on self, because I think we can have that tendency to be so overly focused on our own selves and our own needs that we end up missing what's going on around us and missing the ways in which we can love and serve one another. Thank you for sharing that, Reese. Janine said, mine is anger, I guess, at the church. Forgive them, Father, as they know not what they do. Oh, I hear you. I hear you, Janine. I see you. I've wrestled with that too, as I've seen oftentimes Christians can be the worst. Including myself in that, like we can be the worst and cause lots of harm and lots of pain. And that is a very real thing. That is a very real thing. Reese also said, yes, Janine, I find myself afraid to tell people I'm a Christian because I feel they will think I am judgmental, unaccepting, and closed-minded. It's sad that church and Christianity have such a bad image. Amen. Agrees with that. Yes, yes, yes. I think as Christians, we need to constantly be allowing anything in us that might be against this way of love that Jesus showed. We need to have those things pruned, because the world around us and our neighbors and people, when we aren't loving the way that Jesus does, people get hurt. And so, yeah, I'm with you all. All right, Britt says, mine is a tendency towards black and white thinking. It leads me to put all this pressure on myself to be perfect and really hard on myself when I fall short. Having some grace and accepting when I have done enough would help me move forward in so many different realms of my life. Ooh, that's so, so, so good. Yeah, like this like perfectionistic mindset where we feel like we're supposed to be perfect or we're supposed to have things all figured out, and when we really beat ourselves up when we're not, it stifles us and it keeps us from being able to move forward. That's so good. Yeah, having grace for ourselves. Sometimes we're good at having grace for others, but not so much with ourselves, and we need to be reminded of that today. All right. Let's see. Okay, we will move on to question 2. It says, what are some ways that you can stay connected to the true vine and abide in him? I just clicked on something. Am I good? Okay. Gosh. Can't trust me with this mouse. Like it's, I'm going to end up crashing the whole thing again. Okay. Reese says, I would say to start reading the Bible, but I don't even know where to begin. Hello. Can we just talk about that for a second? The Bible can be super intimidating. I'm terrible at reading and never finish a book past chapter 2. Yeah, it's tough. It's really tough. But yeah, it is, I think, reading the Bible and starting to read, even just reading in the Gospels about Jesus's life and the things that he stood for and the way that he lived and loved and led, is a really great way to stay connected and to actually, if we want to love like Jesus, then a big part of that is opening up the scriptures to see, how did Jesus love? What did Jesus do? How did he respond to people? How did he interact with people? How did he defend the marginalized? All of those things that helps us to love others the way that Jesus loved them. Jenny said, I think I just really don't spend enough time quietly listening to God. I'm like the friend who is always yapping away but never takes the time to listen. Yeah, just having those times of just simply being quiet and allowing ourselves the brain space to be able to listen and to hear what the Spirit is saying. Yeah, that's a really, really important thing. Dino said, inviting Him into my contemplation. So, so good. All right. Is this for question 3? Mm-hmm. Okay. I know for me, one of the things I just jotted down when it comes to how can I abide in Jesus and abide in Him, it's just in every situation, just asking myself, how would love respond here? What would love do? Kind of the whole, like, what would Jesus do? But for real, like, what would love do? How would love respond in this situation? I think keeping that at the forefront of my mind just helps me to respond in ways that are loving, when I really think about that and ask myself that question. All right, we will move on to question 3. What are some ways that we can end up rejecting the invitation to abide in Jesus and His way of love? Dan said, I think we, parentheses I, can do this when I'm more interested in what benefits me versus what's best for the most people and what's best for those on the margins of society. Whew. Yeah. That, again, it goes back to that picture of how the branches are all connected with one another and how it's not just me as an individual staying connected to the vine, and that's part of it. But even more so, it's this communal staying connected to one another and staying connected to the vine and being aware of what does the most good for the most amount of people, particularly those on the margins. Like, that's so good. Because, if it's not good news for the poor and for the oppressed, then it's not good news. So, yeah, I think that is so, so good. Let's see. If there's any. Reese said for question 3, falling into false beliefs, being persuaded by others, or just not caring about your relationship with Jesus anymore. This is very hard not to do in college, and I struggle with it often. Yeah, falling into false beliefs. We do that, don't we? Like, false beliefs about God, about ourselves, about those around us. Like, that kind of goes along with what I had jotted down. I reject the invitation when I fail to fully humanize those with whom I disagree. It's so easy for us to have false beliefs about others and to create this whole picture and story about someone based off of one thing they said or did, rather than viewing people as a whole person. They are a whole human being with nuance and lots of different facets. And so I think, when we fail to do that, we reject that invitation into this way of love. Eamon said, to trust the nudge from the Holy Spirit and surrender the ego that we know better and can strategize better than God, who of all things spins planets around the sun. Oh my gosh, right? Like, spins whole entire planets around the sun, and yet sometimes we think that we have it all figured out. We think that we know better. And yeah, I love what you said, Eamon, about surrendering the ego. I think that is huge. That's really, really, really good. Let's see, Dino said, when I hold to self-preservation and not lean into the tension of change. That just made me want to stand up in my chair and like holler. Like old school Pentecostal church. Like, I just wanted to get up and like start hollering because, oh yes, when I hold on to self-preservation and not lean into the tension of change, yeah, we reject that invitation when we are more concerned with preserving ourselves and our opinions and our safety and our certainty than leaning into what's the new and the unknown and the unexpected. That's so, so good. My goodness, you guys are giving so many. You guys all need to preach the sermon next time. You guys are like giving so many good thoughts. Okay. Britt said, I think it's very easy to get swept up in subscribing our own thoughts onto God. When I assume I know the heart of God, I can close myself off to him out of fear of rejection. It takes away his power to assume he isn't capable of loving us in spite of and because of our flaws. Oh, that's so good. Subscribing our own thoughts onto God. We, as humans, can have such a tendency to create God in our own image, right? And put things on God that God never, ever put on God's self, right? Oh, that's so, so good. All right, I think. And now, are there Facebook chats, or do we not have that right now?
Not right now. We don't have that.
Okay. If you're commenting on Facebook or whatever, I am so sorry because I'm not able to see those comments right now. So I'm not ignoring you. I just
Facebook and YouTube
and YouTube too. I just, because we went offline and came back on, we lost that chat. So I am so sorry. I'm not ignoring you, but I promise you after this, I'm going to go back and read the comments on those just to see what any of you had said. And so yeah, all these thoughts have just been so, so good. And I have learned so much from all of you this morning and listening to your thoughts. Thank you for engaging and for being honest and vulnerable. This is like one of my favorite things, again, about Church Online, is having the opportunity to do this. And but that is it for today. Thank you guys so much for joining us, for your patience. I just have one final thing to talk about before we hop off today. I'm going to take a quick sip of water. My cup's going to look like invisible because of the green screen, because my cup is green. But okay, so last week, both in the message online and in person, we talked about how moving forward, we are going to starting in May, which really, I guess it started in April technically because we gathered in person for Easter. But moving forward, we are going to start having monthly in-person gatherings and still having simultaneous online gatherings. But then also on the other weeks of the month when we are strictly online, we are going to start some icon watch parties. And we talked about this last week, but it's just this idea of, as people are getting vaccinated and as if you feel safe to do so, to start gathering with a few people in homes to watch the online service together and then have a discussion about it. We're going to be compiling some resources too for those hosts, books and podcasts and ideas nothing will be mandatory, but just resources to kind of help take those discussions further. And so if you are interested in that in any way, maybe some of you would say, there's these couple of people that we're comfortable gathering with right now, and so you just want to do with those couple of people and not have like an open group, that's great. Or there might be some of you that as time goes on and more get vaccinated, that you feel safe to open up your home to whoever. If you are at all interested in hosting the Icon Watch Parties, we would love for you to just click on the link that Amanda threw in the chat. And basically, this is not locking you in. You are not like guaranteed. We're not like looking at that as you are saying, I want to do this. This is just if you are interested and want more information, go ahead and click on that link. And then we're going to schedule a Zoom meeting here in the next couple of weeks to gather with all of you who are interested and give you a chance to ask questions and kind of talk details. So if that's you, go ahead and click on that link and fill out the form that it takes you to. And yeah, we're just really excited about what's to come, and we're excited about moving forward. And more people are getting vaccinated. It feels like there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And so we're just really excited about what the Spirit is doing here and it's going to continue to do. So thank you all so much for being here today. I love you all so very much. Have a fantastic week, and we'll see you right back here next Sunday.
And for those of you on Facebook and YouTube, we will have this video pieced back together if you missed any of it, if it crashed for you, and up on YouTube and on podcasts. So
you heard it from the man behind the curtain. it will be fixed. So we are on
Promise.
it. Oh, also, Dan turned 40 this past week, you guys. Dan turned 40.
It's true.
Where's the sound effects?
Listen,
like, why can't we have?
when it
We don't have
crashed,
any?
I lost my sound effects. I don't know where they are. I'll have to find them.
No sound effect. I should have brought my tambourine, and then I'm just kidding. I don't have a tambourine. I used to have a tambourine, but not anymore. It was a neon pink moon-shaped tambourine. All right. Anyway, we love you guys all so much, and we will see you back here next week.